Hello, hello.
Hello, people. You ready to dive into the GATE program?
For anyone who doesn't know, hi, my name is Stephanie. I have been on TikTok here for about 4 years talking about the metaphysical and things of the nature. And as a kid, I was also in a program in elementary school that I have limited memories about, which spawned me getting into the deep dive of the GATE program and the programs of the like with similar names. That's how I came across Jake here, and he did a very beautiful deep dive, and we're going to get into it. So, Jake, I'm going to
Yeah,
say,
I'm Jake. I go by Jake Knows Nothing on all platforms, which is pretty appropriate. That's a very similar story to how I got started on this topic in particular. Just trying to piece together, it was really more of a personal journey. Like so many people came out thanking me for that series, but I was like, hey, I did it selfishly because I'm trying to figure out in my own life what happened because there's these massive gaps in my memory, which isn't really in character for me. I remember a lot of my school experience in detail because those were some of my fondest memories. And so it's something that I've been aware of basically my whole life. It always stood out as odd to me. And then I listened to a podcast a couple of years ago. I believe the podcast is called Theories of the Third Kind or something like that. And they did a whole deep dive into the GATE program. And I remember listening to that a while ago and being like, oh, I check all of these boxes. Like if you don't know already, there's a whole kind of like set of characteristics that a lot of people in the GATE program fall into. And listening to that, I was blown away because it's not anything logical that would make sense that, oh, yeah, it's, high IQ scores, fast reading speed. It's not that. It's literal like genetic traits and, childhood experiences like near death experiences that just don't it doesn't make any sense logically. And so once I checked all those boxes and kind of listened to their whole podcast, I've just been mulling that over for years. And then I saw a couple of videos very recently of people sharing on TikTok their experiences and trying to piece things together, and that really motivated me. It's like when I first heard the podcast, I didn't really have a platform at all, but now I kind of have a little bit of this ability to talk to more people about it and share my experiences. And yeah, I felt like the timing was right. It was time to dig deeper into this and try and piece together what on earth happened to me as a little kid. So I started the series kind of innocently, just sharing mainly what I had already heard about stuff. And then the feedback was insane with how many people shared that exact experience. And so that's when I started trying to really understand the history of this program. Why did it start? What is its official purpose? And the more you dig into this topic, the more unsettling, I guess, it gets. Like just it doesn't make sense the more you look into it. And so it's been a really fascinating ride at the very least.
love that. You mentioned some characteristics that people had that were parts of these programs. Do you know some of those?
Yeah, so I have a list here that it's just a lot of them, like I said before, they're kind of like genetic traits. So that's a big theory with this whole gate program, is that maybe there was some sort of familial tie, like a bloodline type thing, or specific genetic traits that they were screening for. But some of the ones that really blew people's minds were a prominent occipital bun, which is kind of like this weird bump in the back of your head. Some people call it the math bump.
I think I might have
Heterochromia.
that.
I don't think I do. It's at least it's not as, pronounced as other
Okay.
people's are. Heterochromia was a big one, so that's kind of like this weird two-toned eye coloration, which I do have. Like I have like gold kind of at the center of my iris. And there's different forms of heterochromia. There's some like the people who have two different eye colors, like blue and green on each side. That's a form of it.
Yeah. Like
Also,
total heterochromia, right? Or dichromatic or
right,
something.
yeah, there's partial, total. I can't remember the actual breakdown of it,
Yeah.
but
I
a
have
lot of people report that.
I have the central as well. Like I have a golden ring in the middle as well.
Right, and even before I kind of connected any of this to the GATE program, I was already aware that there was some sort of link to that specific genetic trait and being predisposed to psychic abilities, which, let's just get this out there for everyone. This is going to go down some very weird rabbit holes, and it's going to sound incredibly far-fetched. And first and foremost, this is all coming from a good place. I'm not trying to tear down anything. A lot of the big concerns with any sort of investigation into these gifted and talented programs, like the main pushback that I get is that this is somehow harmful to the education system or it's harmful to teachers. So I just want to get that out of the way right away before we kind of go deeper into this list. That's not my intention. I hope that's not any sort of effect that this brings about. And I also fully recognize that there are probably there's a large portion of these gifted and talented programs that do exactly what they claim to do, and I fully support that. I fully support some sort of specialized education for people with different needs and kind of cultivating some sort of advanced intelligence in kids. I love that. I hope that's what's going on. Um, and so it's a really nuanced discussion that we're about to have where it's not really throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you're familiar with that expression. Like I'm not condemning all of gifted and talented programs. I'm not condemning the education system as a whole. A little bit about my background. I'm a pediatric nurse. My dad is a teacher. So basically my whole adult life has been kind of focused on helping children in one way or another. And most importantly, I'm a father. So that was a big motivation for this whole investigation is trying to figure out what moves do I make when he gets older, when he's school aged? Like, do I feel confident in sending him to a public class where he might end up in a gifted program? Like I just felt like I owed it to him and to myself to investigate this stuff and really going on um for a multi reason. So I just want to get that out there. It isn't supposed to be some sort of condemnation of these programs, but I do think that there are certain layers of the program that need to be brought to light. They need to be investigated and talked about because there's a lot of people out there who have very fragmented memories or no memories at all. And just on a human level, like people deserve that. They deserve to know what happened to them. That's very scary, especially like in my background working in the ER and stuff, with seeing so much trauma in children and one of the biggest healing methods you can have is trying to kind of assimilate that fragmented memory and give them some sort of closure. So at the very least, that's what I hope this discussion does, and the series that I'm working on. Hopefully, that is some sort of piece in that process of trying to help people figure out what happened to them.
Very well said. Yeah, I definitely agree. The intention is merely curiosity and trying to uncover our own experiences, as we'll get into more. But there are fragmented memories, like you were saying, people remember parts of these programs. And I remember a very strange part of it. Like, why would we be pulled out of class to be doing something like this? I don't really know. And like we were also saying, there are hopefully parts of these programs that are exactly what they say, and they are really just helpful in that manner. So that's not to say that every single one is like this. I think that there are, like you said, things that need to be researched a bit more. And sorry to interrupt about the continuation of the list of characteristics.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So another one that odd, firstborn sibling of your family, specifically male. And like I mentioned before, near-death experiences, specifically drowning, and that's been reflected in all the personal people that the people have reached out to me, and shared their own experiences. That's a big one for people, and I can kind of speculate in a crazy conspiracy way the purpose behind that or why that would be something that's pretty statistically relevant to this program, but that was a big one is some sort of near death experience. um
I'm interested in the speculation. I also was one of those kids that had like a near-death drowning experience. So,
Me too. And it
oh,
had nothing to do with, the game. It was before that, or
right.
it was in a summer camp. So it had nothing to do with any sort of gift. It wasn't like I'm
Yeah.
claiming that they were waterboarding me or something. It's not that at all. It's just this also happens to show up a lot in these kids who are selected for these programs.
Yeah.
Another a big one is an attempted recruitment by intelligence agencies or other secretive groups. And not only attempted, but successful recruitment. So many people have reached out to me who are actively in an intelligence role in the CIA, DoD, DIA, NSA. I had one person who reached out who's currently working in the NSA, and she said that every single other member of her team was an ex-gate kid, which
Mm,
that seems anomalous at the very
yeah.
least. That's it's just odd to me. And I can't really talk too much in depth about this at all, but I have also had agencies attempt to recruit me pretty recently before I was investigating all this gate stuff. And at the time, it seemed random or just kind of like, some sort of weird synchronicity or chance thing that I got connected to them. But now looking back and knowing what I know about this program, it doesn't seem like it was chance at all. It seems like maybe some sort of grooming happened to me as a child, or I was on somebody's radar through these programs or through some sort of test result, and then they attempt to utilize you later on in life. So very odd, and that's not just me and my own crazy experience. So many people, I like. It's kind of frightening if you look through my DMs right now, how many people are high up in the government and also share these very strange experiences.
Mm,
Another one, which I definitely hit the mark on, is psychic or paranormal experiences. A lot of UFO encounters, alien abductions. And then if you kind of go into the nuance of alien abductions, you get into something called my labs, which I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but that's a military abduction, which a lot of times is disguised as an alien abduction. So that gets pretty interesting as well. But yeah, so many people have echoed that as well, that they were in gate, and a lot of these experiences with the paranormal or what you might consider psychic predate their gate program. So it wasn't like necessarily that we were brainwashed into having these experiences, or they conditioned us on how to access some sort of higher plane, but it's kind of leaning in the direction that maybe that's why we were selected, is there is some sort of predisposition, there's something about these children that they were able to screen for, and they knew that they had some predisposition to be able to do weird things more or less, and
yeah.
it's a very frequent occurrence.
It's super interesting in that way as well, because this is actually why I started researching the CIA declassified documents about Project Stargate. I was looking for some kind of information, some kind of explanation of psychic abilities and why I was having these experiences. And I had them since I was a kid, predating my GATE program experiences. But yeah, one of them, I think we might get to it in a minute, but one of the other like commonalities, I guess, that people share, like heinous nightmares, not wanting to go to sleep, like being really afraid to go to sleep. I was petrified as a child in that way too.
And do you know if that started around the same time that you would have started Gate program, or was that a kind of like a different timeline?
That's a good question. I would say it was probably right around that time. I don't know exactly the timeline, but I was probably around the same age.
Yeah, I have to say I can't, definitively say that, as soon as I started the Gate program, I had started having horrible nightmares, but it was definitely around the same time. I don't remember having that issue before. I don't remember being scared to go to sleep.
Yeah.
But right around that same age where I was in these classes, I started having a horrible fear of sleeping. And not only from nightmares, but another thing that I shared, it's not on the list here. Um, but I was so happy that other people had this experience and that I wasn't just some crazy person, is this weird, faint mumbling of voices that I would hear right as I was falling asleep. So it wasn't like I was dreaming, but it was literally an auditory hallucination. And it sounded like these people, almost like a radio chatter. And that terrified me. That scared me so much. And that was a big reason why I didn't want to try and fall asleep or take a nap or anything, is because I was scared that these voices would come back. And that was a memory that I had locked away for most of my life, because obviously the implications are pretty detrimental to like your professional life and your ability to be a functioning human. And then I started doing the gateway tapes, which is another thing that's kind of loosely affiliated with the CIA. There's the CIA did studies on it. There's no real connection to them
They like funded the Monroe Institute
Right.
essentially.
It's hard to really pinpoint that. The most like all these documents that the CIA declassified about their investigations of the Monroe Institute and the Gateway experience, the Gateway tapes, is just that they're framing it like it was just a third party analysis of something that was interesting to them. I haven't been able to find a genuine connection that they funded it or were a part of the creation of it at all. That might be the case. Obviously, these intelligence agencies are very good at covering their tracks and appearing to just be a third party rather than the actual culprit. And that's if we're getting on the topic of gateway tapes, that's another very strange, very prominent commonality with kids who went through these programs is later in life they are randomly drawn to these gateway tapes or to investigating, Project Stargate and these other now declassified projects. It's for some reason a lot of kids who went through these experiences later in life just happened to stumble on the gateway tapes, and through listening to those tapes and doing that program, that was when I heard the voices again, which I hadn't heard since I was a little kid. And obviously, that triggered a lot of memories. That was kind of not really a pleasant experience at first because I thought I was losing my mind again. And so I was pretty apprehensive to share that little tidbit of information, but just the sheer amount of people who have said that they also heard that and they were scared to talk about that ever has been so, I guess, rewarding. Like it's really nice to know that I'm not. Maybe we're all crazy. Maybe we're all schizophrenic or something. I don't know. But at least we're not alone, which is really nice. And just the fact that it was able to be reproduced with a specific hypnosis meditation tape is also comforting in a way where this isn't necessarily fully a fabrication of my own mind or some sort of defect in my cognitive ability, but
Mhm.
this is really brought on by very specific stimulus and trying to essentially hypnotize myself and get into these different areas of consciousness. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, you start to hear voices.
That's like the premise of the gateway tapes is that it synchronizes the hemispheres of your brain to essentially access more. So it's interesting also because in that hypnagogic state, the in-between state of like awake and asleep, so you're not asleep yet, and that's when you hear the voices. I've looked into this as well, and it's essentially like you are accessing another radio station. Like it's essentially you're able to reach further. You know how sometimes you'll get like on the car radio, it'll kind of cross over and it'll be kind of staticky and you'll hear like certain words. And that's kind of the gist of that. It's like we're tapping into a different frequency in that way. And from what I have seen with the GATE program, sorry, with the Gateway tapes, because I have done deep dives with it. I've gone into the gateway tapes on TikTok and things like that prior. It was essentially funded, and I think they do have the records on that available in the declassified documents
Cool.
for like the Monroe Institute being contracted with that. I got to interview Dr. Scott Taylor, who was the president of the Monroe Institute at the time,
Oh,
and like
that's
I got to
amazing.
ask all questions about all of that. And it was definitely connected. He said that, and it was essentially because I had submitted a FOIA request to the CIA, which by the way, side note, I submitted a FOIA request for the GATE program and like anything related to GATE, EPIC, any type of children program, like anything in this realm with psychic abilities, an extension of Project Stargate. I said all of these things in my request. It was months ago. I have not heard anything back, which like weird because I've submitted one before for the missing page 25 of the analysis and assessment of the gateway process,
Hmm.
and they said they didn't have it. Like they responded and they were like, we don't have that, sorry. And by me
Of
posting
course.
about that online, that's how I got connected to the Monroe Institute. And they were like, we made that document so I can like give that to you.
Oh, interesting. That's
So
amazing.
it
Were
was
you
definitely,
able to actually lay eyes on the missing page?
oh yeah, it's like actually linked in my bio, like
Oh,
link.
all right. I'm gonna
So
have to check
I
this
needed
out when
somewhere
we're
to
done.
just host it, but yeah, it's missing page 25. It's in there.
That's amazing.
So
And
yeah, definitely connected.
along with this topic of the voices, it definitely feels like you're tuning in a radio or something. It's that same audio quality to it. And one thing, obviously, when I first happened to me again in my adult life using the tapes. I stopped using them for a while because I was a little freaked out by it. But once I picked them up again and, started digging deeper into this, trying to elicit these experiences, that one thing that I noticed was that phenomenon almost always happens right before I'm able to leave my body and astral project. It seems to be like a direct connection. Like I hear the voices, and before it would startle me, and now it's like, all right, cool. Now I know I'm getting somewhere because I'm about to be able to astral project or have some sort of strange experience. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I can't definitively say that that was what they were doing in the gate programs as a kid because I don't have memories of it besides bits and pieces.
Right.
But I can tell you that replicating those conditions later on in life, that is exactly what this leads to, is having some sort of out of body experience.
And have you had out of body experiences like as a child as well?
Yeah, so that's actually the next in this list of characteristics that are common in gate kids. Um, One of the things is childhood memories of floating or levitating, which and it's specifically levitating downstairs. That was a big one for a lot of people that I saw. Is this distinct childhood memory of just floating down the stairs and having all these weird levitation experiences in maybe a dreamlike state. Super common. I distinctly remember doing that as a child. And then kind of along with that is experiences of lucid dreaming and astral projections, which I definitely had those as a kid. It was kind of locked away for a long time until I started experimenting with other things in the last few years. And like specifically plant medicines kind of opened up the doors to all of this. Just had a strong to try and recreate this stuff. I needed to know that it wasn't just some, chemical reaction in my head from taking a substance that was making me hallucinate. I wanted to know if I could do this outside of that route. And so that's when I started trying to replicate it with, shamanic drumming, the gateway tapes, regular meditation, sensory deprivation tanks. I've kind of gone through the list of different ways that you can reproduce this phenomenon. And I'm able to confidently say now that it's all the same. All roads lead to Rome, and it doesn't matter if you're taking some sort of, plant or if you're doing it another way, you're going to have the same experience more or less. Which I honestly I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to just kind of be confirmation, like, oh yeah, these are you're on drugs, so you're having a crazy experience. But no, that's unfortunately not the case.
You're like, unfortunately, I was very sober doing the other ones and they still
Right,
work.
right. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
nothing I can blame this on now. It's just me. But yeah, in a way that's, I guess, comforting to know that we're actually stumbling on something that's more real. And frankly, something that most human cultures were already aware of. I think that's one of the things that I have realized deeply is that we are alone in our modern civilization that has kind of stolen the history, and we don't really have any sense of like a shamanic process or any real organized way of passing on these ideas and understandings to other kids who might have these, gifts or whatever. I hate that word. I don't think I'm
Yeah.
gifted. But just, kids that have their minds open to these other dimensions or higher states of consciousness. There's no real method that is similar to what they used to do in different tribes, like having a shaman. And, early on, you would go with a shaman and he would teach you the ways and show you the ropes. And now we have this very weird kind of digitized version of that, which is kind of seemingly through the CIA and hiding in plain sight in our public school systems, which is pretty unfortunate, but that's what it seems like to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that too about the shamanic cultures. I watched a TEDx talk, and it was spiritual psychosis or spiritual awakening or something like that. And basically, the TEDx speaker was saying that in modern day, like you were saying, we don't have shamans and things like that, like they did in indigenous tribes and all of that. So there's a quote that says, "A shaman swims in the same sea a schizophrenic sinks." And I just thought that was so fascinating, where it's like two sides of the same coin. It's like even the last CIA document that I talked about on my TikTok channel talks about are people with certain psychological disorders potentially seeing into other layers of reality. And they worked with healers, and essentially what they found is that like people who are healers and sensitives are able to ground the energy, whereas other individuals are not.
Right. That's a learned quality.
Yeah.
No one taps into this stuff and has these super profound transcendental experiences and then is automatically like, all right, cool, ready to go to work and be a functioning human. Like, no, you're gonna be knocked on your butt for a while trying to figure out how you can live a normal life after this. And it really is a process of learning how to have these experiences while also being grounded in reality and not lose your mind. And I that's one of my favorite quotes that you said about that connection between shamanism and schizophrenia, because that's really how I conceptualize it now. It's just most of these people who we've kind of cast out of society, so to speak, and labeled them schizophrenic or other different psychotic tendencies. I think that we just mishandled them. I just think that they had no real outlet or guidance on how to ground these experiences, how to deal with something that's so profound and bigger than you. And it's really easy to get lost in that storm. And, I felt that in my own life for a long period of time where I would come out of these experiences and it's just like, how do I be normal after this? How can you possibly experience something like that and then also be a functional human being in a society? And it's been a long, arduous process, and really leaning on those past cultures and those past shamanic practices to try and teach myself, unfortunately, how to do this, how to ground yourself, how to, yeah, to put the pieces back together again. And that's a big thing for anyone who's going to be interested in, hearing us talk about this stuff and trying to maybe experiment with some of these things on your own. I get it. I'm not telling you to do it or not to do it. But if you are going to experiment with any of this stuff, you need to also have a game plan and do thorough research and methods to keep yourself grounded and sane throughout it, which is super important.
Yeah, I've had to essentially start like microdosing these experiences, so to speak, because they just become so much, and it's very jarring, like you were saying, from the reality that we're grounded in. So it's like integrating them is so important, and you need to be able to do that. So, slow and steady wins the race, as they say.
Exactly. And I totally understand. I mean, when I first started down this path, I was reckless is an understatement.
Gung
Like
ho,
yeah,
gung
like
ho.
I was ready to do literally anything all the time and go further than any human being had ever gone before, which is probably a huge, ego problem as well. But and so I get that. I understand that you might be hungry to get answers and to understand and to experience these things firsthand. I totally get that. But in order to have a regular life still and be, a functional person, you're going to eventually learn to space it out and that you don't need to do this stuff all the time. And eventually you will kind of learn that it's not even like the both sides of the coin are equally as important. It's important to have these crazy experiences and explore your mind and explore other dimensions or realities or however you want to conceptualize it, but it's equally as important to build yourself up and to be a good person and to, you know, be valued in your friend group and your family and contribute to society. And, you also have to work on the 3D aspects of yourself, not just the other D's. And that was a long, hard lesson for me as well. Yeah, because like it's so easy to get caught up in this stuff and go way too hard, way too fast, way too frequently. So that would be my advice, and everyone will find their own way, thankfully. But yeah, hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and not go too crazy, because it's just not, frankly, it's not needed. You get a lot out of even one profound experience of just leaving your body. Some people, that's enough for a lifetime for them to contemplate that experience and to have some sort of comfort that there's more than just this reality. Unfortunately for me, that wasn't enough. I needed to keep doing it over and over again. But yeah, it's possible to be more balanced from the start.
Yeah, I'm definitely seconding everything that you're saying and like the warnings. And I did the same thing you did. I definitely dove headfirst in a pool that was like, hey, don't dive into this pool. So it's very alluring, it's very exciting. So I definitely get the draw to it. But yeah, if again, not encouraging you to do it or not to do it as well, but if you are going to do it, be safe, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. That's perfectly stated. Just be safe and
Great.
make sure you have a good friend or family member or someone that's there to help you. I know it's
Yeah,
hard. That's kind of what we were talking about before we started this live stream is it's definitely it's hard. There's such a absence of people in everyday life who are knowledgeable about this stuff or are even curious about it in the first place. So it's pretty hard to build up some sort of in-person group that can help you and guide you and you can fall back on them and they can kind of tell you, hey, you need to cut it back a little bit. You need to slow down. But thankfully, we do have these other outlets. We do have social media. We do have these other creators who are kind of risking their reputation to explain this stuff and to share their own experiences. So if you don't have anyone in your day-to-day life, reach out to any of us. You know, my DMs are open. I know plenty of people who can also help you and are willing to help you. There's plenty of Discord servers, all sorts of random ways that you can connect with other real people and kind of start building that system around you. And that's another big thing for sure is you don't have to go it alone. You're not alone. There are in fact other people that are interested in this stuff. You just have to get creative with how you find them.
totally. Very well said. Online community is just as important as well. If you aren't able to access that, like we were saying, it is seemingly fewer and far between with people in person, at least from my experience, that are into this realm of everything.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, let's get through this list.
Yeah, let's continue the list.
All right, so big thing, obviously, which is kind of like the whole initial start of my series is having suppressed memories with specific triggers. And one of the most popular triggers that gets kind of everyone that went through the gate program is these headphones, these weird retro headphones that were sometimes connected to like this big clunky briefcase thing, and we would do audio tests. And there's a series of other triggers. I just want to speak on the audio testing first because that's a point that people get hung up on and like I mentioned before, I am a nurse. I am a pediatric nurse. I was trained on how to administer hearing tests for children suspected of hearing deficits. And not only that, it's this is a test that is administered across the spectrum. All school-aged kids have a normal standardized hearing test. That is not what we are talking about. There was something else going on. But that's a huge point that people get confused by or will automatically write this whole discussion off because they'll be like, "Oh, you're just misunderstanding. Like they were just testing for deafness." I know how to do that test. I was not given that test. So I just want to throw that out there right away for anyone who gets confused. And also I feel like that kind of sets the tone for how a lot of these things are going to go. Because if you know anything about the intelligence world, they like to hide in plain sight. That's one of the best places to hide. And so you'll notice a pattern with a lot of this stuff where they will be able to mask certain testing that was done on gate kids with other normal, more mundane tests. So if they can give every single kid a hearing test with those headphones and then do weird stuff to the other kids, it's going to make it that much harder for the other kids to ever be able to whistleblow about this or go to their parents or come out later in life because so many people are going to be like, oh, yeah, I had that. I did that too. It's normal. What happened to you was normal. What happened to these kids was not normal. And that's a really important distinction. I have yet to be able to articulate it in a way that doesn't hang someone up. But I'm trying my best to explain that there's a very distinct difference between the normal school aged hearing tests and the extensive testing that was done on gate kids. I remember wearing those headphones for hours. They would kill my ears. I was all the time in them and doing not testing just to see if both my ears worked and I could hear the normal range of frequencies, but it was things like, I mean, some of it was just straight up hypnosis, which I know now. I didn't know as a kid. I had no context for any of this stuff, but now I know that that was what was being done to me. Some of it was, and this is what a lot of people have reported, it was almost like a predictive test where it was similar to the audio deficit test where they would do frequencies in both ears just to make sure that you don't have, one ear deaf, but it was designed to test you on whether or not you could predict which side the next tone was coming from, which just logically at face value would have no real use in testing for deafness, having this ability to psychically predict where the sound was coming from. But that was a big prominent one that I remember. So yeah, it's a very nuanced discussion, and that's probably going to come up more and more. Is a lot of these things are extremely similar to other more mundane things that virtually all kids have gone through, and it just makes it that much more difficult to talk about this stuff without someone just kind of shrugging it off because like, oh yeah, I did that. It's like, no, you didn't.
Yeah, I think that was said super well. And I think that also ties into the point that these programs potentially were government funded. If we're talking about a continuation, which we'll get into the history in a bit, but if we're talking about a continuation of these government programs and these gate programs are some kind of like psychic, aptitude or something of that nature, I mean, it makes complete sense going to like a public school anyway. I went to a public school and it's partially funded by the federal government. You know what I mean? Like, what an easy in. And a lot of parents are going to say, oh, wow, my kid's gifted. Of course they're going to be in this program. It's a very like alluring guise that could
Right.
potentially cover it. So, the same way where it's like, oh, these hearing tests, oh, everybody's just getting hearing tests, like, not a big deal. It's like, oh, is there something a little bit more to that though?
Right. I mean, and that was I actually got into. I try not to read negative comment people, but I recently had a back and forth with someone who was trying to paint me as this like evil conspiracy theorist who's tearing down the education and stuff. And she brought up the potential that the Department of Education might be shut down. And I was like, that in and of itself is evidence that the federal government is influencing public education. Like, do you see the
Yeah,
connection there?
I was
Like,
gonna
that is
say,
by definition, that's not a conspiracy theory. That is what it means is that the government is able to control all of the public education that's happening on kids. And if you know anything about the federal government, its sole purpose, its sole existence is self-preservation through violence or threat of violence. Like those are the two cards that they play. And so you have to stop and really think like, are they doing this? I used this before in a different video. Like, are they doing this out of the kindness of their heart because they just really care about kids? No, if it doesn't fall in line with their own self-preservation narrative, then they don't care about you. And that's reflected in all aspects of government. But it's there are certain blind spots that people have because they use an emotional argument where it's like we got to save the kids, we got to, or one thing that you brought up was like, don't you care about poor kids getting education? It's like, what are we talking about? Of course I do, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like a government entity influencing and manipulating the education, and then even more so being able to specifically target poorer kids who don't have access to higher education, and then kind of playing to the ego and be like, oh, like, do you want your kid to be in a gifted program? He's special. And right away, that is a manipulation tactic to kind of stroke the ego and to not have you think too deeply. So if anything, this is directly going against that, where I'm trying to stick up for these kids who maybe don't have resources and are being taken advantage of by these programs. So it's hard because I understand where she was coming from. I understand where all these people are coming from. We're all on the same page. We all want the best for kids. We want them to have a great education and grow up to be the best possible version that they can be and have all the resources at their fingertips to do whatever they want. We all agree on that. But the government doesn't. They never have. And if you don't fit in some sort of box that they can then use in the future, they're not going to invest their time and money on you. So then the question is, why were they investing their time and money on us? What was the purpose of these gifted programs?
Yeah.
And I mean, not to go, we'll get into the history of that later, but yeah, that it was it's been fascinating to kind of see that develop as I talk about this more publicly.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to consider too, like what is the purpose of these programs where, like I mentioned, if it was like a public funded thing and it's a government program, if you know about like double blind studies and things like that, different types of blind studies, they can set it up in a way that they don't know that's what we're doing. You know what I mean? Because that's part of the program. It's part of the report. It's part of the analytics of that program and how it works and the efficacy of it. Because if they know, then that leads into the possibility of suggestion contributing to it. So it's possible that obviously we were not informed that it was actually potentially a psychic program or something like that, but it was actually a gifted program because what else are they going to say?
Right. And the thing is like this isn't necessarily implicating teachers because that's another like sore
Right.
spot for people is like I'm trying, I'm attacking your mommy who's a teacher in the gifted program. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that this stuff can be so insidious that they could use teachers without their knowledge. They
Yeah.
could give them a curriculum that's is official. It's through the public Department of Education. It's very official and very normal, but the actual purposes of it might be kept from them. They might not actually know why they're doing the things that they did to kids. And that's a huge part of this where I'm not necessarily condemning all teachers. I do think that there's layers to this, and some of the people who were hands-on in these programs, the random people who showed up in suits and ties and things like that, they may have been more privy to some of the darker sides of this program. But if you know, like I'll say this a million times, if you know anything about how these more clandestine group, these intelligence organizations operate, they will utilize people without their knowledge, without necessarily implicating them in any of this madness. And so I think that there's a lot of that going on where a lot of these teachers were doing it from a good place. They thought that they were helping these kids. Maybe they didn't really think too critically on what the curriculum actually is or if that logically makes sense in some sort of genuine advanced education program, but they were just following orders, which, that the history of that phrase is pretty dark and gloomy, but that's a thing that happens in humans. Like we are a lot of times sheep and just kind of following along with things without really stopping thinking if this makes sense or what might an ulterior motive be. So yeah, that's just one point I wanted to make is I'm not saying it's all teachers, they're evil, they were, harming kids. It's not that case. They themselves were being manipulated and used in a way, and that's kind of further reason to dig deeper into this and investigate it and see like was part of our curriculum hijacked for some other, other government purpose? Like it's
Yeah.
at least worth looking into.
Yeah, agreed. And like you were saying too about, I mean, the argument of, oh, like the education system is going to be, cut or something because of, these allegations. Not for nothing, like that wouldn't happen if there was no evidence. That wouldn't happen if there was actually nothing. You know what I mean?
Right.
If that's a concern, like that's evidence, in my
Right,
opinion.
right. And I mean, not to, yeah, like everything kind of falls into politics, which is frustrating because I'm not trying to make a political argument at all, but just this notion that people couldn't educate themselves without the federal government's influence is insulting to me. Like that's what do you think happened before the Department of Education was created? You think everyone was just chewing crayons and drooling? Like how do you think this whole militaristic empire was created? It was created predating the Department of Education, predating any sort of influence like that. So it's frustrating that people really only see these things through a narrow lens, and they use the emotional points to kind of really rile people up. And I get them. I sympathize with that, but at the same time, we don't need we don't need the government's influence to be able to get a good education for children. And it's hard to really sell that when people are just like, you're taking away funding for poor kids and stuff. It's like I'm not. First of all, I have no say in anything. And second of all, I feel like at least we have a better shot. Like at least if it goes down to the state level, now we have 50 chances to have a good education system instead of one chance. Um, but yeah, I mean that's just a nuanced conversation that not many people like to have.
Yeah, super fair. Were there more characteristics on the list as well?
Yes. So forehead scar was a big one. And then yeah, I got one dead center, and my brother has the same exact forehead scar. Um, it also had a near death drowning experience. Um, and then for this, I'm going to add something that I haven't talked about publicly yet, but I mentioned it on a live stream and I got way more reaction than I thought I would. There is a alarmingly high frequency of people who were in the GATE program and have a triangular shaped scar.
I have where? Where is the scar?
It's been reported in a lot of different places. A lot of people say their hands or like the webs of their fingers. Some I think one person said somewhere on their leg. A lot of people on their face, but it's like a very specific triangle shaped scar that has never really gone away or faded, and they don't know the origins of it.
Mine's like a birth. I like want to show. I don't like if I can show it. My leg here. I have like this right here. You see like a little
Right.
triangle.
Yeah, dude. So many people have that, and I don't
That's
know what
crazy.
that's about. It makes me
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
it makes me uneasy as well,
Right.
actually.
And
You
like
say
one
that.
person mentioned it in a DM, and I was like, all right, I'm just gonna throw this out there and see if there's any connection. And then so many other people DM'd me about this freaking triangle scar, and I was like, oh God, like I accidentally stumbled on something else that might be relevant. So
Yeah.
who knows? Who knows what that's about? Maybe
Huh.
they were just falling on a lot of triangular objects as kids, but
Maybe.
yeah, it just I don't know. To me, it just feels noteworthy. That yeah, so forehead scar in particular, but then also there's a lot of oddly shaped scars that kids are reporting.
That's so
Yeah,
peculiar.
yeah, super weird. Migraines is another popular one. This one's interesting because I don't really know how to. I have an idea of how to justify it, but it's not it's pretty woo-woo. But lenient with law enforcement. So people will be put in these situations that are seemingly not very good. The outcome would not go well. And then law enforcement is just miraculously soft on them and nice, and they get a free pass. And obviously that's not like the rule across the board, but a
Right.
lot of people have these experiences where like I should have gone to jail and they just sent me on my way. So I don't know if you have anything like that, but that's been an interesting one
So
to talk about.
I have caught an arrest charge before. It was for marijuana in a state where it was not legal.
Got you.
So it's weird because in my state it is legal. So I wasn't expecting and like an arrest for that. But it could have gone to like, like when I was in court and things like that, it could have gone a lot worse. They let me do like a restorative justice program and take a class about why marijuana is so evil and all of those things. But like it got expunged from my record. It wasn't in the newspapers or anything like that. Like I would say that's pretty lenient considering how it could have gone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was in that class too. It was not exciting. It was for underage drinking, which I don't condone.
Yeah, we're
Don't
not
do any
endorsing
of the
any of
things
this.
that I did. But not even just that experience. I've had so many experiences. Like I'm talking like 10 cop cars surrounding me, searching my vehicle, and like there's just no way that I would have ever conceived of them being like, all right, have a good one, like sending me on my way. Like, but so many times I've had that, or if I do get a ticket, I'll just go to court and the judge will be like, all right, that's fine. They were in the wrong. It's like, what? I was in the wrong. Let's be honest here. Like, I should have gotten a ticket. I just am broke right now. But yeah, I've definitely noticed that. Like, I've developed this weird sense of confidence anytime I get into an altercation with some sort of law enforcement because it's always gone well for me, and I don't know why. The only thing that I could grasp at as a reason, which is totally unfounded, but if these children in the program are somehow predisposed to psychic abilities and this ability to kind of interact with different states of consciousness, then maybe that is in these high stress situations where you are facing some sort of punishment from law, maybe that stress is enough to induce this ability in you and you're able to kind of like psychically calm the situation or something like that. That's the
Mm,
craziest far-fetched idea, I understand, but that's really the only way that I can justify this being on the list with
yeah.
so many of us having this experience.
That's super fair, honestly, and it gives me the vibes of Stranger Things, which
Right, I know. I don't
by
want
the
to bring
way
that
was
up.
no, no, no. It was based on a real government project,
Right, right, right.
so allegedly. So that makes sense to me in the potentiality of that ability. You know what I mean?
Right, right. And it's not, I'm not saying that like there are the gate kids were like these superheroes wandering the streets and they can just, change people's minds telepathically and stuff. But if it's more of like this unconscious reaction to it where you're backed into a corner and you're stressed, then maybe that you are able to fall back on something that you're not necessarily aware of or understand, but some part of your mind is able to navigate through these situations and sort of manifest a more positive outcome when it's more dire.
Yeah.
Um, so who knows? Maybe that's a part of it.
It's
But
giving like telepathic influence. Like I think that
right, right, and that's I don't think I have that on the list, but that's another quality that a lot of people have reported to me is that they are able to kind of, I don't want to say like incept thoughts into people because that sounds so crazy and I don't really believe that. But they
I
are
believe
able
it.
to sort of influence people around them
I
without
totally
without
believe it.
verbiage. Like they're able to get a vibe out there and that's reflected back to them.
Yeah. Have you ever seen, there's this guy, he claims to be, I don't know what the word for it, like an illusionist, I guess is what he
Mm.
claims to be. But he does exactly that and he incepts people's thoughts, like inserts a thought into their head. He's like, okay, so pick a color, any color, but then in the same time, he's projecting a color like into their brain so that they're so like perplexed when he gets it, but he was doing that the whole time,
Right.
allegedly.
Is that like
So
a mentalist or is that what
a
they call
mentalist,
them?
that's the
Right,
word that
right.
I'm
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
for.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean there is like I've seen some of those tricks explained with more subliminal messaging leading up to the big payout of the trick and stuff, but none of that is like discredited phenomenon itself. That's something like you are subconsciously putting out that subliminal messaging to people without even knowing about it. But that's just like, I'm scared right now. I need to figure out a way to get through this. And so you are somehow softly suggesting to people that, I'm innocent, I can be let go, I'm a safe, good citizen. That is possible. Like there's a million different factors to this, especially if you believe in things like manifestation and stuff like that, which I think is, pretty reasonable at this point in my life. So yeah, that it just it's that was a weird one on the list, this whole leniency with law enforcement and just
Yeah.
the sheer amount of people who have confirmed it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
The theory behind it makes sense though, like you're saying. And I mean, with the subconscious influences of like when you're panicked like that, it's almost like your energy is amplified. Again, all of this unconscious, like you're not doing it intentionally. It's just with that energy, that intense like fear or anxiety or whatever you're feeling, it's amplifying what's happening theoretically.
Right.
So that would potentially be, an explanation for that, what
Right.
you're explaining as
And
well.
it could even be more mundane, which like if these gate programs are just trying to work with children who exhibit higher IQs, then maybe higher IQ people are just better at navigating these tricky situations and kind of getting out of a ticket or something. That could also be a factor in this. I'm not saying, but the whole premise of the IQ scales is a whole other rabbit hole of what what a high IQ actually even means and who developed the IQ scales. So that gets a little tricky as well because it goes right back into like the metaphysical stuff. But if I'm trying to play devil's advocate for people who want this to be just a mundane explanation, then maybe
Right.
that's a factor. That it's
It
just
could be.
really smart people who are really good at talking their way out of tickets and stuff. But it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it could be, of course, you're right. There's no way. I mean, we're speculating here. We're just kind of going based off of um like evidentiary, anecdotes that people are giving us because we can't find information on this from like the government or things like that, which again, if you think about it, according to FOIA, it's not even the time frame. Like we really can't find information on this because of the time frame. It's supposed to be like 20 years or something like that, and at least
Yep.
mine was early 2000s.
Yep.
So it's like nearing on 20 years like now, and some of them are 25. Like there's caveats to it. So like I mentioned, I tried to submit a FOIA request and I have heard nothing about it.
Right. And to be totally transparent, I don't have any confidence in the FOIA mechanism
Oh,
whatsoever.
no.
Like that even if we do get some, I mean, anything is better than nothing. So
Right.
I've talked to a few other people who are submitting them or working on submitting requests for different aspects of the GATE program, and I think that's awesome. I just personally I have such a distrust of government entities and the information that they're actually willing to share. And just based alone on the lack of transparency this whole time, where so many parents didn't know anything about the GATE program, barely even knew that their kids were in it, let alone that some of the kids were taken off site to weird field trips and stuff. Like they had zero transparency about this stuff from the get-go. So
Yeah.
I have no confidence that they will be like, "Oh yeah, come on in. Let me tell you everything about the gate program." I just don't believe that. They have no incentive to. We have no leverage. So why would
Well,
they implicate themselves in some sort of, horrible child experiment?
like speculatively, I feel like it's similar to like MK Ultra, where that one like heinously horrible, and that wasn't their intention for it to go heinously horrible, obviously. So I feel like it's something similar to that. And like I mentioned earlier, if it was some kind of like a blind study, they can't tell us those things. So I think that would be not really an incentive, but that might be kind of an explanation of why the lack of transparency and everything as well. And with the FOIA requests and things coming out, it was done with tax-paying dollars. So like there is some kind of a check and balance with that system. I mean, do I believe the CIA
They're
entirely?
supposed to be.
No, no.
Right.
Well, right, allegedly. So I think that there's stuff that would be released, but I think it would only be like a fraction of what's actually there. I think it would
Right.
be something like, here, shut up. Here, let me appease you. Like just
Exactly.
take
Exactly.
this one piece of information and run with it. And then there's like actually more. So it's actually good that there are other people submitting FOIA requests for these things because it takes at least three people requesting a certain topic of information for it to be released as well. So it's helpful that the more people are doing this, the more that they're going to essentially have to release at least some of it in some capacity.
Right. Right. And I feel like our best, like again, I don't have any trust in the political systems at all, but if we could get this topic in a more mainstream form where there's actual pressure to have some sort of congressional hearing and things like that, I feel like that is our best bet at having any form of disclosure because MK Ultra is the perfect example of how something like this goes. Like I personally suspect that these gate programs are an extension or direct result of MK Ultra, or maybe actually fall under MK Ultra, which is still in operation today.
Mm.
But even when all that came out and they had some congressional hearings about it, and I mean, the stuff that came out was outraging. People were freaking out about it, but that's such a small percentage of what actually happened that we will never know about because they burned all the documents. So I feel like that's just their MO. That's what they're going to always do is they're going to first of all not make any tracks, and the few tracks they make, they're going to cover so well that even if they do throw you a bone and give you a couple of redacted documents here or there, it's not going to tell you any more than you already know or suspect. It's frustrating.
Which is essentially the history of how these, agencies work. And I think it's silly to me how some people are like, "Oh, you guys are crazy conspiracy theorists, whatever." And I'm like, you've seen any of that, right? Like MK Ultra, Snowden, like there are so many
Right.
examples of things that like just within the last, I don't know, 50 years.
Right.
Like
Right. And I mean, and like I feel like I'm at an advantage in terms of distrust of the government because I had a weird upbringing. I was around a lot of very interesting people growing up. And so I grew up hearing stories of people who were in classified military projects and like their job was to release different contagions on people, American citizens at Grand Central Station in Manhattan. And they would do studies to see how the traffic flow through Grand Central and then release a different biological weapon and then see how much they could decrease traffic over the next few days. So like I was already at least somewhat aware that there was a huge disconnect between what the government portrays itself to be and what it actually does.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe it's a little bit easier for me, more easier than it should be, to see through a lot of the BS that they put up there and be like, I don't believe what you guys are saying to me right now. Like I know you've done some really dark stuff on your own citizens. So I'm just going to assume that you are at least still capable of doing that. And that's always
Oh,
going to be a factor. It's always going to be on my radar.
yeah. Was that something on the list as well? People having connections to like governmental agencies?
Oh yeah, that's a huge one. Most people that I talk to have a military family. And it's hard because a lot of people who were involved in some of these agencies never actually disclose that to their family because they're not allowed to. So there's a bit of a game there with getting like real concrete, even if it's anecdotal information. People aren't sure. A lot of people be like, I think my dad may have worked for a CIA agency or something like that. But a huge connecting piece is military, and then, unfortunately, I don't know how deep we want to go into this, but it's secret societies and specifically Freemasonry.
Mm.
There's a lot of families who were involved in Freemasonry and their children were in the GATE program.
I see like ads for Freemasonry, like on the highway and stuff. They're just like, join the Brotherhood. And I'm like,
Right,
what do you
right.
mean?
I mean, so I grew up in a religious cult called Jehovah's Witnesses,
Okay.
and not many. It masquerades very well as some sort of like weird semi-mainstream religion, but it's through and through a cult. And then if you really dig deep into the history of it and some of the original teachings of it, it has direct connections to Freemasonry. And that's what you find with a lot of cults nowadays, and a lot of branches of mainstream religion, is that they have deep hidden ties to this weird, all connecting tree of Freemasonry, which is a very, very long standing organization. So it's not even necessarily conspiratorial or far fetched. Like they've just been in the game for a long time. So they're going to naturally have connections to different offshoots of ideologies. Um, but yeah, that's one that I can't really deny anymore. Not only because of my own personal experiences, but just the sheer number of people who have come out and confirmed that there's definitely a connection there.
Yeah, definitely. I have some family in the CIA, and like I've had like my grandpa was in the Navy and things like that. So
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until I started digging through all this stuff that I started asking questions about my own family. And I mean, I knew that everyone on my dad's side was, everyone on my mom's side is in like a Freemasonic cult, and then everyone on my dad's side is heavily in the military. But I didn't like my grandfather was recruited for the Apollo program. So like
mm,
there is I have very close connections to these weird government agencies and programs that I wasn't even aware of, but that definitely could have been a factor of why I was on their radar for this gifted program, which seems to, a lot of people confirm that. You know, it's all speculation. We don't really know, but we're just trying to connect random dots and see what it looks like.
totally.
But yeah, secret organizations, and also I'm gonna lump in. I think it might be on the list here as well. But another big one is Mensa, which is the organization for like basically the criteria to join Mensa is you have to be top 2% of the population in IQ scores to be able to get into this group. Um, and that's another one that I think probably has. I don't want to say a darker side to it, but I don't think we're getting the full picture from the outside, if that makes sense. I feel like Mensa is maybe a little more complicated than just a group of really smart people trying to hang out with each other. There might be a more coordinated effort or something like that. And there's a high incident rate of kids in the GATE programs also trying to be recruited or are currently in Mensa, which also tracks if we're just, playing devil's advocate saying this is just for some really smart kids, then it would make sense that the really smart organization wants to get them into the program. But there's just too many weird ties that it just feels off. Something feels weird to me.
Totally. Yeah.
And I had my own encounter with Mensa. Like that was the first piece of mail I ever got addressed to me was a recruitment letter from Mensa. And I thought that every kid got a letter from Mensa, and I thought that they were just like a scam company trying to hit people up for a monthly membership fee. At least that's what my parents told me. So I just wrote it off and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like someone wrote a letter to me and my name is on the envelope. But it turns out that not everyone got that, and that was like a targeted thing, which is especially odd in children. Like that's not normal. They don't, first of all, they don't
Mhm.
usually reach out to people, and they almost never reach out to children. So there must have been some testing score or some mechanism in place through my public schooling that flagged me for them to reach out. That's the only explanation I can have.
That's fair. I was thinking about the public school, like, I don't know, almost like recruitment process for GATE in these programs. And I was thinking of like the standardized tests and stuff that we had to do, like all of the federal ones, and, who's to say that wasn't connected in some kind of a way.
Right. I mean, so that kind of gets into the broader understanding of why the federal government is involved in public education at all. And one of the biggest things that I point to help people understand this is the National Defense Education Act. I'm pretty sure that's the term for it. But this was something that was came out as a reaction in the heart of the Cold War. So there's huge rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union launches the first satellite into Earth's orbit, Sputnik, and everyone's freaking out over here. They're like, "We're falling behind. The Soviets are going to get us. We don't even have a space program yet." And so there was a lot of reaction behind the scenes of the military and intelligence part of the group trying to bolster up its army, more or less. They were trying to figure out ways that they could have smarter, more impactful people a part of their programs for the sake of national defense. So I'm not even saying that this is all evil and horrible. Like, I want to live in a safe place. So I would sure love that the people running things are intelligent. Um, but that it's not even like some link. Like it's the education is linked to now. So it falls under that category. And so they were really scrambling to develop these systems of screening the population and finding kids who might be more adept at certain areas of, military combat, intelligence, cryptography, like a million different things. There's a million different things that the government does. So there's a million different roles that they would screen for. And then they figured that the best method would be to cultivate that skill as early as possible. And so that was really the heart of all these gifted programs in the first place, is it was a military reaction to being scared of the Soviets during the Cold War. And I don't it's not even far reaching or anything. It's they spell it out for you really if you look at the history of these programs that was what they were designed for. It wasn't because they, love smart kids and they want to get them a good education. They don't care about us. They wanted soldiers. They wanted spies. They wanted really useful people that they could condition at an early age to be the perfect weapon for them or the perfect tool for them. I don't remember what we were talking about that made me go into this tangent. But yeah, it's it's not, you don't even have to really dig deep into the history of any of these things to see that it's directly connected to that. Like that is the whole entire purpose of this. And maybe there was a more mundane part of it, or maybe it kind of evolved into something that is more mainstream education and just trying to work with kids who have special needs. I have no doubts that there is a huge portion of this program that is designed to do exactly what it says it is. But you cannot deny the fact that that is not how it started out. It was literally everyone was scared of a major war and they were trying to create the best spies, the best soldiers, the best intelligence officers, people who could crack codes, and they started as early as possible. And that's not even new. That's what cultures have, and civilizations have been doing for a long time. Even like ancient Rome, ancient Greece, they all had these programs that were designed to find gifted kids and train them at an early age to make them the best that they could be for specific use within the government.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And that's what they did with the remote viewers through Project Stargate. Like it was following exactly the same thing that you're saying. It was like a national defense type of thing that they started out under, trying to, level up in that way and get a leg up on the opponents or whatever.
Exactly. And if you kind of follow this, if we're using the parallel of these weird programs that we have today next to ancient shamanic practices, then the logical conclusion is that this training is most effective in early, like prepubescence. You want to get the kids right when they start showing signs to be able to train them and bring them up in the ways of shamanism. And that gives you your best chance. That's when they're the most open to these ideas. They don't have as many biases that they bring to the table. And they're just excited to learn and explore. And if they have their mind opened up to these other different states of consciousness that a lot of people necessarily don't have off the bat, then that's when you want to mold them and teach them the ways. And so if the government was doing these projects trying to investigate that phenomenon, they were doing things like MK Ultra, Project Stargate. We know for a fact they had interests in this stuff, then it wouldn't be that far of a reach to assume that that's what they discovered is that it's most effective the earlier you get to these kids, the earlier you get to these people. Like you can teach an adult how to remote view, but he brings all this weird bias and life history to the table and ego that's going to influence the results and skew things. But if you can get a little kid who doesn't know anything and teach them how to remote view or harness their ability to remote view, then they have more of a clean slate and less things that would influence the results.
Yeah, and it's honestly not far-fetched of an entire concept that children would be, I don't know, more malleable. And that is how it works, like even with language and learning an instrument and things like that. Like it is so much easier to learn when you're a child as opposed to an adult. Like it is possible, but like you said, maybe that is a finding that they came to from MK Ultra, from Project Stargate and all of that.
Exactly. And I mean, multiple factors to this. I think another big one is that it's easier to cover your tracks if you're using children. It's easier to discredit them, it's easier to manipulate them, and it's far easier to fragment their memories through trauma
Yeah.
when they're that young. And I think that that was sadly a huge factor to all of this is that like it's the best of both worlds. You get a kid who's primed and ready to go astral project, and then you can just completely manipulate him, lie to the parents. They'll have
Yeah.
no idea what's going on when they enter the school building, and then
Yeah.
you can probably very easily compartmentalize their memories of the program. So then when they're adults, they don't even have access to what happened. They just know something was weird, but it's all a big blank, and that's harder and harder to do the older you get.
Yeah, and like I had mentioned in one of my videos, but one of the things that myself and the other two people I know in person, like from my actual life, that were a part of these programs from a different city, all three of us have the distinct memories of being extremely upset, like being so distraught. Mine to the point that I asked my parents to get me out of the program entirely.
Right. So many people were begging to be out of the program. So many people report uh, giving wrong answers purposefully and trying to throw off the results so that they would get kicked out of the program. A lot of people reported homeschooling, which was me. I begged my parents to take me out of school. I didn't want any part of it anymore, and I was eventually able to homeschool from like eighth grade on. And I didn't really understand that for the longest time because like I said I grew up in a very strict religious cult, and so the only part of my life that ever felt normal was my time in school when I could have friends who weren't in the cult and I could just be myself, and that was always like a safe haven for me until a point when I was like completely averse to it and I just needed to get out. And I never really was able to understand that in myself until looking at it through this lens. Or maybe there was some red flag that I was feeling and I wanted to get out, even though that was like my one shot at having a normal life and normal friends. That wasn't worth it. I had to sacrifice everything to get away from it. And I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm projecting, maybe I'm, filling in blanks that aren't real. But that to me, that just seems like the most likely reason why I would pull myself out of the one area of my life that was like it's relatively normal, minus the gate program stuff.
Right. Like I even remember when I had asked my parents to pull me out of the program, I was like, "Oh, but I was selected for this program. Like they said I was smart or something like that. Like maybe my parents will think I'm not smart or like people will judge me for not wanting to be in this program." And I remember like this massive internal dilemma with that where I was like, "I feel so uncomfortable. I have to do that." So it's like at what point are kids just making that up? You know what I mean? Like the way that that was like your outlet, that was your safe haven. So like,
Right.
why would it make sense that you would want to be out of that?
Right, right. And like there's a huge factor to this that is specifically targeting egos. Like we talked about that with parents and kind of puffing them up, telling them their kids are really special and they're gonna go do these specialized classes. And that automatically shuts off critical thinking. And then, like you just mentioned, like the pressure to stay in it and this almost weird obligation. Like I'm kind of spitting in the face of this opportunity, seemingly. But like all of that leads up to this idea that there was something else going on. There was something darker because it doesn't logically make sense that all these kids who were given this amazing opportunity didn't want it and they wanted out of it and they were doing like desperate attempts to try and sabotage it to get out. And like to me, like from a medical perspective who's dealt with so many countless kids who have been abused, like that screams abuse to me. And there's many different types of abuse, but that you can't deny that that feels wrong. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't logically make any sense. And it wasn't just you, it wasn't just me. So many other kids had that same experience, and then that coupled with complete memory loss is so concerning.
So concerning. Yeah. And I mean, again, that's why we're here doing this deep dive. That's why we're here trying to look more into this because it is wicked jarring to not have memories of something that was like so heinously upsetting for you. You know what I mean?
Right, right. And if anything, like it should have been our most prominent memories, right? Like just the idea that you get selected out of your class amongst all of your classmates, and they're like, you're gonna get to do really smart stuff with the smart kids. Like that should have been at the forefront of our childhood memories. Like this is so cool. I can't believe I got to do this. But it's the opposite. It's removed from our memories. Like that doesn't really track even with like a lot of people say like I had one gate teacher who was DMing me and just trying to rip me apart and tell me that like I don't have any memories of the gate program because I was bullied. And I was like, I wasn't bullied though. Like I had friends. I loved school. I don't have that experience. Like I'm sure that might be a factor for other people. But that doesn't make any sense for me and my own personal experience that I would just have a total blank of this one aspect of school where if anything that should have been my most favorite cherished memories is like getting to do this cool special stuff and learn more advanced stuff. It's no, it's the opposite.
Right. Same page. Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
It's definitely so frustrating. And like I'm glad that we're getting answers though. So you've gotten obviously this checklist from other people that like were in the program essentially just from other reports of what like their characteristics were and what their experiences were.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not taking credit for anything. Like this is all built on the backs of other people. And that's what I keep echoing is because people will reach out and be like, what do I do next? Where do I go with this information? I don't know what to do. And there's not a lot that we can do, but besides cross-referencing our experiences, sharing them publicly, and kind of breaking down these weird barriers that were put in place, I feel like that's our best chance of piecing it all together. And so that's really where this whole list stems from in and of itself is people who grew up, became adults, started realizing there was something weird going on, and then talking with other people who were also in the program and seeing like, hey, like you have a forehead scar, I have a forehead scar. You drowned at a summer camp, I drowned at a pool. Like that's weird, right? And then the more that you do that, the more loose data you can kind of put together and the more connections you can draw. And it's not perfect by any means, but right now it's the best we have. And so that's, yeah, a lot of these things were taken from different podcasts that I listened to, different whistleblowers. Um, there's one podcast I don't know if you're familiar with. It's called the Imagination Podcast. It's on primarily on Rumble right now. I think she's being censored pretty much everywhere. But she has a lot of whistleblowers from a lot of the like Project Stargate, MK Ultra, a lot of the Monarch programming stuff, and a lot of Gate people will go and share their experience with her. And one of the most prominent whistleblowers in this realm of gifted and talented programs is a person who goes by the name of Gray. Ironically, we grew up in the same cult, so that's kind of funny. But he kind of was the main person who put together a lot of these things as far as the historical timeline of it. He's been really invaluable in terms of pushing through a lot of these hazy memories. I think he definitely has access to more memories than most people, which is lucky. But yeah, he's been a huge factor in kind of helping other people put all this stuff together. So yeah, I don't take credit for anything. I'm just trying to scramble to put pieces together and add my own little spin to it, and just mainly put it out there so that other people can also cross-reference this stuff and hopefully add to it. And that's what's been crazy is the amount of people who are sharing their memories of things that are way deeper than I remember, like being taught how to astral project, how to remote view, being taught very specific phrases that they had to chant in meditation.
Mm.
Once you hear so many of those, you can't really keep writing that off or just be like, oh, this person's off the rocker. Like they can't all be crazy. They can't all
Right.
be having these very specific memories and experiences associated with these gifted and talented programs. There has to be some layer to this. So yeah, that's kind of where this list came from, and I'm slowly adding to it the more that I talk with people, like the triangular shaped scars. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, it's such an interesting rabbit hole.
Love that. Yeah. And like you had mentioned with different accounts of what people remember, I had posted in one of my videos that somebody I know that was in the program personally reported learning about the Fibonacci sequence, which I thought was so fascinating because I have that as a tattoo on my side, which I got when I was 19. It just resonated in a way I couldn't explain. And
Wow.
they distinctly remember being taught the Fibonacci sequence. And people in my comments were saying the same thing, like, oh, I remember I learned the Fibonacci sequence there too.
Interesting.
So I
That's
thought that was
fascinating. Yeah, I
really
love that.
strange. So there's
And
like a lot of, and I definitely still give you credit for like piecing all of this together. This is such a massive deep dive that you've been able to do and like get information from different people from podcasts and any other sources because there really aren't a ton of resources on this, which is also why we're here collaborating, having this podcast so we can like get some more information out there and hopefully get some more answers as a whole.
right, right. And it was, I mean, it's not easy by any means. Like it took me weeks and weeks of just like a crazy person just consuming every single medium I could to try and understand this before I ever made even the first video. Because I wanted to have like a more comprehensive understanding of it before I, put something out there and just painted myself as an idiot or something. And then it just yeah, like the sheer number of resources that actually are out there if you dig a little bit. It's not surface level stuff. But there actually is a surprising amount of people, and it's exponential growth. When I first heard about this topic a couple of years ago and really resonated with it because of my own experiences, there was almost nothing out there, like zero, like maybe three posts on 4chan or something. Like, and not obviously that's not credible at all. But now it's been such this crazy exponential growth of people coming forward and sharing their experiences and making content about it. I feel like this is a really great time right now. I don't, and another aspect to that I've been toying with is maybe there is some sort of expiration date to the programming that was done to us. Maybe they didn't really have long-term studies on these different memory suppression techniques, and maybe they're just wearing off. And so now more and more people are remembering things and realizing, hey, that was odd. And for some reason, we all gravitate towards each other. Like I when I first started this, I asked all my friends about it. Like 95% of them were all gate kids. None of us knew that. Like there's no logical reason why every person I know and interact with on a regular basis was also in a gifted and talented program. But here we are. And so many people, their partners, their husbands, their wives, they were also in gate. And they're just learning about it now. They heard my video, they're like, "This is so weird," and they share it with their wife. And then she's like, "I was also in the program." Like I don't know why, but there is some weird factor to this where we all gravitate towards certain things, like each other, like the gateway tapes, like this, you know, weird research into CIA projects.
Mm.
There's just something about it, I think, that feels familiar to us. Like these are waters that we have already traversed before and we know them. And so it's easier to go back to them.
Yeah, super fascinating. It's like almost like I don't know if it's like a principle of resonance, essentially, where it's like we can feel that on each other, even though we don't know that that's what it is. Like even my roommate was a gay kid, and like
Right.
didn't know that until literally what, a couple days ago. Didn't know that.
Like how, and the astounding amount of people that have said that same story to me. Like it's so I feel insane at this point. Just because like I don't know how to explain these things without touching on some more out there theories. But yeah, that's what it feels like, some sort of weird resonance thing, or like we were all conditioned. And it's the same thing like, you know, military vets like to hang out with military vets and stuff like that. Like we all went through something. We don't necessarily know what it was, but it definitely formed who we are as adults. And it's way easier to identify with people and get along with people who went through something similar to you. And that is really profound, that even if it's an experience that you don't have conscious memory of, it still can shape you in such a way that you will find yourself being around other people. Yeah, it's really cool.
Gravitating towards the other individuals or things that feel like that. Yeah, it's fascinating. Was
Hmm.
there any more characteristics on the list?
Uh, yeah. So, a big one. Well, first I'll read this. So this was a quote, I believe, from an actual Gate program document, where it said that children have a heightened self-awareness accompanied by feeling of being different, which I feel like that's a statement that almost everyone who went through this really resonates with. And a lot of people report this feeling that they're like waiting to be activated in some way, or like they were
Mm.
prepped for something greater, some greater purpose than what they're serving in now. And there's just a sense of waiting around for some major event or something to happen, and you can finally be utilized to your full extent, like you always thought you would be.
Yep, resonates.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
that could
weird.
be ego. Like maybe it's just ego that we all
Like
thought we
it
were
could
special.
be, but like the way that every single person probably in these programs felt that, like it's hard for me to write that off just as ego, especially as like kids, you know what I mean? That's not even really in that
Right,
inflated sense of self. It's more of like a genuine, like eerie feeling that it's kind of uncomfortable, actually. It's not really
right.
something that I'm
It
like,
sucks.
wow, we're so special. Like, no, like it's an eerie feeling. We have missing memories. There are things that are not adding up. It is not all that it's like, oh, an ego
Right.
trap per se. I mean, could it be? For sure? Who knows? But what I'm getting at with what I mentioned too, and especially being that young, it feels, and the similarities, that it's just everybody that was a part of these programs. Same thing with like this list of characteristics. I mean, what are the odds that this is so unanimous across the board?
Right. And I think the statement that, like, the first half of that sentence kind of offsets this notion that it's entirely egoic, where it's the heightened self-awareness. So it's
Hmm.
not like we're all just walking around with this inflated sense of self and thinking that we're special and that we should be used for a better purpose or a fancy job. It's we are acutely aware of ourselves and our ego and all these different factors that could be at play. And we're constantly checking ourselves and making sure we're not crazy. We're trying to understand our where we fit in reality and in society. And it's so I feel like that is kind of the opposite of just a pure ego driven notion that I deserve more. I have a higher purpose. I should be famous. Like it's not that. It's this weird self-awareness that like I have some ability that I'm not able to fully use right now, and I don't know what that is, and it feels bad not being able to use it.
Yeah, exactly. Very well said.
And then the next on the list is Rh negative blood type, which
Mm,
goes heavily into some sort of genetic anomaly or something like that. Uh, which the main conspiracy theory behind that is that there is some sort of I don't know how to say this without sounding insane. A lot of people believe that people with Rh negative blood types have some sort of alien hybrid DNA, or there's
heard that
something along
theory.
those lines. I don't know how much I buy into that. I'm not saying it's not possible. I myself have had some very profound encounters with non-human intelligence and crafts and stuff like that. So I'm not taking it off the table. But yeah, that's one of the most prominent leading theories. Like not only is it some sort of genetic mutation that they might have been screening for, but it may have been specific bloodlines in our in our population that they can trace back to some sort of weird alien influence, and that is a factor in our abilities to have these more paranormal experiences.
An interesting thought. I like it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough sell for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with everything else, it's like an interesting food for thought, definitely.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not going to take it off the table until it's definitively proven otherwise, which
Right.
will never happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I can't say no.
skepticism is healthy. You know what I mean? Like it's healthy that people are skeptical of these things that we're saying. And like, had we not been in this program, I mean, I don't mean to speak for you, but I feel like you might feel the same where I wouldn't believe me either. If I wasn't in the program, I'd be like, I don't know, that sounds a little far-fetched here. And I'm like, listen, I get it. But there's
1000%.
a reason that we're standing on business right now, like talking about it and actually getting into it where we could completely sound insane. And I get that.
Right.
But
Right.
like there's a point that we are doing this for, like ask those
Right.
like why would we do this just to sound crazy? You know what I mean?
Right, right. We didn't choose this. This
Yeah.
was something that was done to us without really our consent or like pre-knowledge of what was going on. And now we're just kind of dealing with it and trying to sift through it. And I feel like the best way to do that is to aggressively examine and consider all possibilities, no matter how strange they might be. Because that, what else are you gonna do? You can't just sit there and keep shrugging your shoulders and be like, "No, that's too insane. That can't be that." Like, we're only left with insane possibilities here, so there has
Yeah,
like
I'm like, do you
got to
have a
consider
better
them.
suggestion? Like,
Right, yeah, and I'm that like that was the whole purpose of this. The whole purpose of my research was trying to prove myself wrong because I so desperately don't want to live in this kind of a reality where I was like MK Ultra as a kid or something. I didn't want that at all. Like that's not fun or I'm not proud of that. Like that sucks. And it sucks that I still don't have answers and I won't be able to really ever give my, child a clear understanding of what happened to me or anything like that. So yeah, like we didn't choose this life. We're just trying to deal with it. And our particular brand of dealing with it is sharing it with other people publicly.
making sense of it and finding some kind of like a comfort and solace in that it wasn't just us, like we weren't the only ones. Like it's validating in that way where, oh yeah, that did happen. I was in a program, I was pulled out of class, I was doing like weird activities that had nothing to do with school, or like why would I need to be learning that?
Right. Or why was it in a trailer with all the windows blocked out?
Mine was an auditorium room, like the back room of an auditorium. And I,
Right. Or people talk about closets, like
yeah.
all sorts of weird things right away, like just from a surface level child predatory standpoint, you're like, red flag. What do you mean you covered all the windows up and took three kids into the trailer? Like, that doesn't make sense. That's not
Oh,
for higher learning. What are you
yeah.
doing? Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, but so many people have like just a much greater capacity than I do for accepting weird things, I guess.
Mm.
All right, so the last one on the list is hearing changes in frequencies and high-pitched sounds. And that's one I want to just clarify because there's a lot of confusion about that, similar to the hearing tests, where people will be like, that's just tinnitus, bro. No, that's not. Tinnitus is almost always bilateral. Like if you're working a construction site, you're operating the jackhammer and you get hearing loss and tinnitus, it's going to affect both of your ears. There's very rare circumstances where you would have hearing protection in one ear and damage the other one and have that high-pitched ringing sound. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but the general rule of thumb is it's only a tinnitus diagnosis if it's bilateral. So if you're experiencing this weird high pitched frequency in one ear, it might not be tinnitus. It's probably something else. Um, and you can obviously get into the more weird explanations of it. Like people like if you kind of look at the spectrum of psychic abilities. There's something called clairaudience, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And that is kind of like another description of this phenomenon where you hear these weird changes in frequency or pitch, and sometimes it'll even shift. Like I'll hear it in one ear, or I'll hear it in another ear, or I'll hear a change. Other people, like you can almost hear electronics working. Like
Yep.
you can hear, like if your fan changes frequency, I don't know what that means, but I hear it. Like, so that's a very common one in these children who went through this program.
Interesting. Yeah, I too have the tone shifts and hearing that in like one ear. Like I'll hear it like switch in one ear.
Right. And
It's
it happens all the time now. And some people even report like they remember the this sort of hypnosis tape that were played to them in those old weird headphones during the program,
mm,
and they hear those tones again, which is you can hear them if you listen to the gateway tapes. You can hear a lot of the same audio, and this weird, like almost melodic beeping tone that they play at the beginning. That's a lot of what we listen to in the gifted and talented programs, and they'll hear stuff like that again just randomly throughout the day, in one ear or another, and it might change, shift, change in pitch, like a lot of different things that are just they cannot be explained by some sort of hearing damage. But I think more logically, it's some actual greater capacity for hearing, and where you are picking up on things that normal people don't hear in that spectrum. And that's actually one thing that a lot of people talked about with the testing, excuse me, in the GATE program, is they were tested on very high pitched frequencies, like sounds that only a dog could hear, like a dog whistle.
mm,
And they were able to hear those things. And to the point where they remember like other instructors and more high up people in the gifted programs coming to test them and to see for themselves because they were really kind of impressed by their ability to hear these things out normal range of hearing. Definitely tracks with still being able to do that later in life. And it's just this weird anomaly that some people have.
interesting. Love the criteria, quote unquote, like the loose diagnostic, not even like diagnostic criteria, but the loose list of things that people experience that were part of these programs. I think it's helpful to kind of hear that and validating, like we had mentioned already. I know on one of your videos you had gotten into like the history, the timeline of this progression. If you, I know we touched a little bit on that already, but I'd love to hear like kind of how that process went, like looking into that and the continuation.
Yeah, so I have just like a pretty comprehensive timeline document that I put together that I have. I'll send you the document as well. It's pinned in a one section of my Discord server, but I put together like a more condensed version just for content purposes. And this one, I mean, this is really just like a loose timeline of things that were happening around that time. I started back in 1945 with Operation Paperclip because I personally feel like that's relevant. Like,
Yeah.
so if you're not familiar with Operation Paperclip, it was post World War II where the United States recruited a lot of scientific researchers from Germany, and they had interests in a wide range of things. So it wasn't just rocket scientists, which is typically what people focus on. Because if you don't already know, that was essentially how NASA was started, was from these specific men who were recruited from Germany, brought into the folds of the US government, and kind of stole their ideas more or less on rocket science. Um, but one of the things that pre-World War II Germany, I got to be specific about the words I use. Pre-World
Yes.
War II Germany was known for was behavioral experimentation, psychological experimentation, experimentation with different substances on people, and some really weird, far out occult research and archaeology. And it
Mhm.
wasn't just the rocket scientists that the U.S. recruited; they recruited all the top guys. And logic would conclude that they were brought over and paid to continue their areas of expertise. It wasn't that they, brought them over to be the CEO of a bank. They were brought over here to continue their behavioral research. And so that's why I kind of start this timeline at Operation Paperclip, because I feel like that's super relevant. And that kind of was the first domino in this effect of the United States kind of taking over that more, I don't even know how to put it, this more sketchy research, I guess you could say. Stuff that they really, really like, they initially condemned Germany for doing. And that was a lot of the impetus for going to war. But then after the war, they're like, all right, guys, come on over here and work for us. Like, you're doing some interesting stuff over there. Like, let's keep it up. So it's this weird kind of like twofold thing where it's sketchy at best. I'll leave it at
At
that.
best.
And so then after 1945, they brought over all these scientists in their various fields of studies. Then in the 1950s, which is officially documented where MK Ultra starts. I would
Mhm.
assume that it probably has direct linkage to when they brought the guys over 10 years prior. But officially in 1953, that's when MK Ultra is started, and that's where the CIA is exploring mind control, hypnosis, sensory isolation, drug use, and psychic phenomena. And then a few years later, so that was 1953 and 1957, which we talked about already. We have the Sputnik incident. So that was when this, rivalries or tensions were already super high between the U.S. and Russia, or Soviet Union at the time, and the Soviets basically blew the US out of the water in the start of the space race. And so everyone was pretty scared that we were falling behind. And so the reaction to that was the next year, not even a full year, I think it was a few months later, the National Defense Education Act gets signed, which is directly linking education to national defense funding programs to identify gifted children. So that's where we come in. That was the whole design of these gifted programs, is to find the best and brightest of kids for various different purposes and try and indoctrinate them and cultivate those gifts and talents as early on as possible so that we could then later utilize them being the US government in their adult life. 1960, we have something called Project Talent. This was led by a psychologist named John C. Flanagan. Now, his history was he developed a testing method for screening World War II fighter pilots. There was a whole psychological test picking out people who have above average abilities to predict things and navigate through very complex situations, which obviously that makes sense. You would want an almost psychic person flying your fastest fighter jet. So he developed this whole thing. It was called critical incident technique. It was initially used for finding fighter pilots. And then he brought it over to Project Talent and applied it to students. So, same techniques for finding essentially good soldiers was used on the kids to find good soldiers and kids. Um, and a lot of his methods are more experimental behavioral techniques. A lot of the things, if you research it, are kind of echoing these MK Ultra studies that were going on at the same time. And you don't really know exactly how much they're sharing notes, but it definitely makes sense that at this time where everything is being ramped up and they're trying really aggressively to get ahead of this potential threat of the Soviet Union, that they would kind of combine forces and borrow what they've already learned from MK Ultra studies and apply it to these projects that are being implemented on the mass public. And then that brings us into the 1970s, which is where we have Project Stargate, which is famously in response to the rumors, once again, that the Soviets were researching extrasensory perception phenomenon. And so this Project Stargate was a joint effort between the CIA and the Army to explore psychic phenomenon like remote viewing for intelligence applications. And right around this time, gifted programs like GATE are conducting memory and sensory tests, which very closely resemble psychic screening. And then that brings us into the 1980s. In 1988, there's something called the Jacob Javits Act, which is very hard to find. The Jacob Javits Act, the actual document, is scrubbed from the government websites, things like that. But basically, it expands gifted programs, potentially aligning further with intelligence agendas. And then NSA and DARPA integrate STEM-focused curricula for gifted students. So not a lot of people realize that STEM, which a lot of people hold up as like what the gifted and talented programs were meant to be, right? It was designed to just educate kids more on science and technology, mathematics. That whole principle came directly from the NSA. Like that was specifically for military purposes to have kids who are very, very intelligent at very specific roles to then recruit them later on in life. So that's just one thing I wanted to throw in there because a lot of people say like, oh, these gifted programs were just, to help with STEM. It's like, do you know what STEM comes from? Like that was literally an NSA project, and trying to create these pipelines for cybersecurity and defense. And then, so that's essentially where the timeline ends in this condensed version. And we talk about declassified MK Ultra and Stargate documents suggested that gifted kids or gifted programs may have covertly screened children for intelligence and defense capabilities. And now it's one thing that was a direct result of MK Ultra being brought out in these congressional hearings and kind of officially shut down is the CIA transitioned from being the official authority of these research projects to farming it out to third party independent companies so that they had plausible deniability. And that's also mirrored in a lot of these gifted and talented programs where it used to be like this one cohesive National Defense Education Act, and then it's kind of gotten broken up and fragmented into all these different entities. And that's why you'll see kids say like, oh, I was in GATE, I was in TAG, I was in AIM. Like there's all these different names and it's all regional. And they all have different curriculums and things like that. And I feel like that is at the very least suspiciously mimicking how the CIA then handled their MK Ultra projects, where they have plausible deniability, they're not officially involved anymore, but they're contracting it out to these other guys, and all the information is being funneled back to them. So that's kind of a brief history of these gifted and talented programs.
Love that. Beautiful connection there as well. And I don't know that I have any more questions specifically, but if you have anything else you want to add, I think that'd be great. And we can also go into Q&A if anybody has any questions here on the live.
I don't really have any much. The only thing that I would like to just reinforce is that neither of us are trying to tear down the education system or want any sort of lapse in the ability to care for kids who might need specialized education, whether that's more advanced or less advanced in either direction. And that's actually one thing that we haven't touched on before. Uh, the GATE program has another counterpart to it that not many people have talked about, which is the special education programs. So at least it's in theory. I've seen some documents. I don't know how legitimate they are, but a theory behind it is that there was children who were more obstinate. They were less malleable. They were more fighting against authority. They were put into special education programs and told that they were unintelligent, that they had speech problems, a huge correlation with speech therapy programs and these gifted programs. And they were kind of beaten down and told that they were dumb. That's a huge factor to this that I'm just slowly uncovering. And actually, like one of my best friends, that is his experience, where
Mm,
he's literally one of the most intelligent people I have ever met in my life. And for most of his childhood into his adult life, he thought that he had a huge intellectual deficit because he was literally put into a classroom and just berated and told that he was dumb, that he couldn't learn, that he doesn't know how to read. None of those things are true. And like he's like an expert computer coder. Like it doesn't track at all with who he actually is.
mhm.
And through trying to investigate that for him, I've learned that there was kind of two different directions that they took kids in. Probably some form of experimentation to see if you have this population of kids who are predisposed to psychic abilities. What happens if you take one group and tell them they're special and do testing on them, and you take another group and tell them they're complete idiots and not worthy of anything in society, and then do experiments on them. So that's just probably the last thing that I would like to share with people because there's a lot of people I see even in my comments and DMs for like, hey, I wasn't in a gifted class. They put me in the special ed, but I did the same stuff. Like we did all these testing and it's like, yeah, it's like you were just a part of the experiment. You were another variable to see what would happen if we took a negative approach with your education, which is horrifying. It's
Yeah,
pretty infuriating, honestly. But that's probably the last big thing that I would like to share with people. It's that there's so many different methods and layers to the experiments, basically, that they did to us.
yeah. Beautifully said. So thanks so much for all of your information that you've shared with us and your deep diving. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everybody else here will appreciate it. And like I mentioned, I think it's very validating and very helpful for people who were part of these programs that also have missing pieces and fragmented memories and things that they're trying to uncover and make sense of.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been super appreciative of, the back and forth that we've done leading up to this podcast and kind of a sharing of information and some crazier TikTok videos and stuff like that, just confirming our own experiences. And yeah, it's very rewarding. Like it's unfortunate that we can't really share concrete proof or answers of any of this stuff. We're trying our best to kind of paint a picture for people, and this is just one angle of it. This is just my perspective. Not saying it's the absolute truth. I don't even necessarily fully believe it myself still. But the most rewarding, best aspect of all of this is just the confirmation to know that I'm not alone. You're not alone. No one watching this is alone. At least we have each other, even if we're all crazy and losing our minds. And this was just some normal thing that we're imagining in our heads. At least we're imagining it together. So that's the thing that I would like to leave it on. Is just I'm grateful for the all the people that have reached out to me and have left comments. Just for my own sanity, for my own sake. Like I said, like I really started this series kind of selfishly, trying to get answers for myself. And it's been so amazing having that feedback and having other people like yourself kind of introduced into my life who are like, yeah, no, I went through that as well. And I think there's something to this. And that's kind of the best that we can hope for right now.
Totally. Love that. And I'm glad that we could connect and collaborate on this discussion too with Gate, and hopefully we get some more answers in the future.
Yeah, but everyone leave comments, share your experiences, even if
Please.
it's something that we already talked about, share it anyways, because it's just more data points, it's more confirmation. I know that a lot of this stuff is sensitive or you feel crazy talking about it and you're maybe hesitant to put it in a public forum. But there's a lot of different ways to reach me. I'm sure there's different ways to reach you as well. So if you feel inclined to share a certain aspect of your experience with these gifted and talented programs or some sort of special education program, don't hesitate. We'll be gentle. We'll handle your personal private information sensitively. But yeah, it just helps all of us with to be able to share more aspects, more angles of this with more people. And we're waking up, we're unlocking new memories all the time. And that's the best that we got, like I said. So yeah, don't be afraid to throw your hat in the ring.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you and your time. Thank you for this.
Yeah, thank you.